We are now officially in the endgame for the story. The buzz around the Jujutsu Kaisen community is that this is definitely the finale arc of the story. Considering that Kinjaku is dead and Sukuna is the last remaining villain, and if the main heroes do end up defeating Sukuna, then what's left to tell in the story? If Yuji survives at the end, and then even his dream of dying with others around him and leaving an impact, he wouldn't even need to strive to achieve that goal anymore because he survived. He defeated the cursed being that infected and ruined his life ever since episode 1 of this series. For me, if we do see Sukuna dying at the end, that will now signal to me that this is it now. We have officially finished the story. So before Sukuna does die or survive, depending on what type of ending Gege is planning for his audience, I feel there is still some unanswered questions that we need to get answered before the official end of the story. Because I feel if we have these questions answered, then it sort of wraps the story nicely. And to be fair, in my honest opinion, I feel we should have gotten these answers well before we even entered the final arc, but that's just me. Your tribal chief has compiled a list of 4 major points that I feel us fans need answered before the story ends. And of course, comment below and let me know if you guys feel you have your own questions that I missed out in saying in this video, but you feel Gege should be answering before the story ends. So looking forward to seeing those. Okay, so for me, the first major question I want to see answered, and to be fair, a lot of these will be answered by Gege as flashbacks if he were to show us. But the first one for me is Sukuna's past. We have seen glimpses here and there, like during the Sukuna vs Yorozu fight. We have seen Heian era Sukuna there, with Yorozu being in love with Sukuna and not wanting Sukuna to be all alone. And again, in chapter 238, where it was mentioned where Sukuna, back in the Heian era, defeated the Sun, Moon and Stars squad, as well as the 5 empty generals serving the Fujiwara clan. He also defeated the Abe clan's elite forces, which included Angels and the Deshi Pacification squad, which were composed of the Sugawara clan remnants. Sukuna was dominant in that era, and we hear throughout the story how much of a monster the guy was. But even in chapter 238, we just saw Sukuna in the background with silhouettes. We didn't necessarily see a flashback showcasing Sukuna's dominance throughout this period. Everyone knows that Sukuna wasn't born as a cursed spirit. He was just a Jujutsu sorcerer who is titled as the strongest sorcerer in history, as we see in chapter 223 when Gojo and Sukuna have that big face-off. It's there in the text for us all to see that Sukuna is also known as the strongest sorcerer in history, as well as having titles such as the King of all curses. So how did this happen? When did Sukuna become a cursed spirit? When was he known to be the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer in the world? When did he become known as the King of all curses? What was he like during the Heian period? Was he the king of the world at that time, ruling as the head emperor in Japan, since he was the King of all curses? And finally, how did he lose? All of these questions are basically all linked into one massive question for the story. Where is the Sukuna flashback? That is what it all boils down to when it comes to his character motivations. His lust to be the strongest. Why did he become a cursed spirit? I feel every question we have in relation to Sukuna's character will be answered in a simple flashback shown by Gege. But my fear is that he may show this flashback too late. Say if Sukuna does die and then Gege decides to show the flashback. No one will care at that point. The damage is already done. I think for now, since we are seeing the fight coming to a close very soon, so add the flashback in now. I released a video earlier on where I talk about whether the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbase care more about the story or the actual characters of the story, and quite a few of you have mentioned that you don't even care about the story now because a lot of the characters have died off. It's like there's a bunch of fans within the community have now an apathetic feeling towards the story. But for me, if we do end up seeing Sukuna's backstory before he dies, it could re-energize the fanbase. And another character's past I think would be good for us to see is Yuji's backstory. Not just his, but in general, if we were to see Yuji's backstory, I think naturally we will end up seeing the backstory of his family line, which ties back to Kinjaku. And again, I think we need to see Kinjaku's backstory as well. What us Jujutsu Kaisen fans are missing is some lore and history for this story. The fight scenes are epic. I love reading them, but sometimes you do need a break, and learning about the world of the story that you are invested in makes the story a whole story, rather than just another battle manga. It keeps the fanbase more invested in the story. One Piece is the perfect example of this. Us One Piece fans call it lore piece, and for a lot of the people, these chapters where we get history and new lore behind the story is what hypes up the fans even more. I would argue that the Reverie arc in the manga is up there in terms of fan favorite arcs post the 2-year time skip. The amount of information we learned in these few chapters generated so much hype for the continuation of the story. We learned about Roxy Zabek, who was introduced in the Reverie arc in chapter 957 and was the reason why Garp was labeled as the hero of the Navy. The world building within the world government itself when we hear the plans on getting rid of the Shichibukai. That in itself gets us fans hyped because it changes the dynamic of the story now. And all of this is done without a fight taking place. Now that the government don't want the Shichibukai anymore, that brings more hype for the potential fights between guys like Mihawk and Akainu fighting off. So lore and world building can also make use for potential future dream fights within a story as well. Kinjaku's plan and history will open up so many doors for us fans because he has been reincarnating for at least 1,000 years. So what did Kinjaku influence? We know he influenced Yuji's birth, but what else did he do throughout the years, and what's his connection with Sukuna? The Kinjaku flashback holds a lot of weight to it because he has connections with Sukuna and Yuji, the two main characters of the story. And I'm guessing as well that Kinjaku also influenced the factions and wars between the great families and clans of the Jujutsu world. If Kinjaku was able to influence Yuji's family, how many more other families has he influenced? That's a question I feel needs answering. And what was his plan? Why was he so hell-bent in trying to get the people of Japan fused with Master Tengen? And just in general, we just need to learn more about the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. Why is it that Jujutsu sorcerers in Japan are the strongest? What about the other countries and their sorcerers? I understand that we may not get Kinjaku's past being revealed, but surely we will see Sukuna's history, right? Sukuna is too important of a character to not have a flashback being revealed. And now because of his family ties with Yuji, the Sukuna flashback will definitely be linked back to Kinjaku and Yuji. So even if we don't get full answers from the flashback from Kinjaku or Yuji's past, the Sukuna flashback alone can potentially give us plenty of answers. I'm not asking for much, Gege. Just give us a few answers and we'll be content with the story. The fight scenes are all great, but just to get some of the fandom out of that apathetic state, we need some lore and world building before Sukuna dies just to wrap up the story nicely, in my opinion. But let me go over to you guys now. What are the plot elements you wish to see Gege reveal before the eventual end of the story? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the Shaman Tribe.